Imagine walking into a pizza restaurant. You order 2 large pizzas, you pay for them, you eat them. Nothing unusual so far. Now imagine discovering, years later, that those 2 pizzas cost you more than $1 billion. Sounds impossible. Yet that is exactly what happened in one of the most extraordinary financial stories ever recorded. It is a story about technology, timing, and a decision that seemed completely ordinary at the time. But it is also a story about something much bigger. The truth is that history is filled with moments like this. Tiny decisions, small choices, seemingly insignificant actions. And then, years later, those moments become worth fortunes. Today, we're looking at 3 real people who made decisions that would eventually cost them staggering amounts of money. But before you judge them, ask yourself one question: would you really have done any better? Let's begin with the most expensive pizza in human history. Back in 2010, Bitcoin was little more than an experiment. Almost nobody had heard of it. Most people considered it a strange digital curiosity created by anonymous programmers. A single Bitcoin was worth less than a penny. There were no major exchanges, no Bitcoin ETFs, no billion-dollar headlines, no celebrities promoting cryptocurrency, just a handful of enthusiasts discussing it online. One of those enthusiasts was a programmer named Laszlo Hanyecz. Laszlo believed in Bitcoin. He spent time mining it on his computer. At the time, this was remarkably easy. You didn't need warehouses full of specialized machines. You could mine thousands of Bitcoin from a home computer. In fact, Laszlo accumulated around 10,000 Bitcoin without much difficulty. Today, that sounds incredible, but in 2010, those coins seemed almost worthless. Then Laszlo had an idea. What if Bitcoin could be used to buy something real? Not traded, not collected. Actually spent. So he posted a message online. He offered 10,000 Bitcoin to anyone willing to arrange the delivery of 2 pizzas. Someone accepted. The pizzas arrived. The Bitcoin changed hands, and history was made. It became one of the first documented purchases made with Bitcoin. At the time, the transaction was worth about $40. A fairly ordinary takeaway order. Nothing more, but history had other plans. Over the following years, Bitcoin began its astonishing rise. $1, $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000, then higher and higher and higher. Suddenly, people started doing the maths. 10,000 Bitcoin multiplied by current Bitcoin prices yielded a staggering figure. A number so large it barely seemed real. Those pizzas had effectively become worth more than $1 billion. The media called it the most expensive pizza purchase in history. And yet something fascinating happened. Laszlo didn't spend the rest of his life crying over missed opportunities. In interviews, he repeatedly said he had no regrets. Without people spending Bitcoin, it could never become a real currency. Someone had to make that first purchase. Someone had to prove the concept worked. And that someone happened to be him. It's a remarkable perspective. Because most people spend their lives haunted by missed opportunities. Laszlo chose something different. He accepted that nobody can predict the future. And that's a lesson we'll come back to later. But first, let's move from a man who spent a fortune to a man who accidentally threw one away. If you're enjoying the video so far, leave a comment below and tell us this. If you had owned Bitcoin in 2010, would you have held on to it? Or would you have sold it long before it reached today's prices? Now let's talk about a hard drive that became one of the most valuable pieces of electronic waste in history. In 2013, a Welsh IT worker named James Howells was doing something most of us do from time to time. He was cleaning up. Old cables, old computer parts, old electronics, the kind of forgotten technology that accumulates in boxes and drawers over the years. Among the clutter was an old hard drive. At first glance, it seemed completely ordinary, the sort of thing many people would throw away without a second thought. Unfortunately, there was one very important detail. That hard drive contained the private keys to thousands of Bitcoins. Years earlier, James had mined Bitcoin when almost nobody cared about it. Like many early adopters, he viewed it more as a hobby than a serious investment. At the time, the coins had very little value. Then came the mistake. During a clear-out, the hard drive was accidentally thrown away. gone, buried somewhere in a landfill site. At first, this wasn't a disaster. Bitcoin was still relatively obscure, but then the price began to rise, and rise, and rise again. Suddenly, the forgotten hard drive wasn't just a piece of old technology, it was potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Imagine realizing that your fortune is buried beneath thousands of tons of rubbish. Imagine knowing exactly what you've lost, but not being able to reach it. That became James Howells's reality. Over the years, he proposed elaborate recovery plans, teams of experts, excavation projects, advanced scanning technology, robotic searches. He believed the hard drive could still be recovered. The problem was convincing authorities to let him dig through a landfill. The story attracted worldwide attention. News organizations covered it repeatedly. People became fascinated by the sheer scale of the loss. Because unlike many financial mistakes, this one was physical. Somewhere, beneath layers of discarded waste, sat a tiny device that may have contained a fortune. Or perhaps not. No one knows for sure, and that's what makes the story so captivating. It feels almost like a modern treasure hunt, a real-world version of buried treasure. Except that instead of gold coins and pirate maps, the treasure was digital. The irony is remarkable. Throughout history, people have searched for riches hidden beneath the earth. In this case, the riches were actually there. The challenge was getting permission to look for them. But as painful as this story is, it still doesn't compare to our final example. Because our last story involves a man who willingly walked away from what would become one of the most valuable companies in human history. And unlike the hard drive, he wasn't forced into it. He chose it. In the 1970s, 3 men helped start a small technology company. 2 of those names became legendary. Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak. The third man is largely forgotten. His name was Ron Wayne. Most people have never heard of him. Yet for a brief moment, Ron Wayne owned 10% of Apple. Think about that, 10%. Not 1%, not a fraction of a percent. 10%. When Apple was founded, Wayne was brought in because he had business experience. He was older than Jobs and Wozniak. He helped draft documents. He provided guidance. And he became an official co-founder. But there was a problem. Wayne was worried. At the time, Apple was just a tiny startup. There were risks, debts, uncertainty, no guarantees. If things went wrong, he feared he could be financially liable. So after only 12 days, he made a decision. He sold his stake. His compensation was approximately $800. At the time, it probably seemed sensible, prudent even. Many people would have done exactly the same thing. After all, most startups fail. Most never become anything significant. The problem, of course, is that Apple wasn't like most startups. It became one of the largest companies in history, a company worth trillions, a company whose products changed the world, and that 10% stake, its future value would become almost unimaginable. One decision. 12 days, a lifetime of consequences. Yet even here, the story isn't quite what people expect. Ron Wayne has also expressed remarkably little bitterness. Like Laszlo Hanyecz, he understands something many people struggle to accept. Hindsight is perfect, the future is not. Looking backwards, every opportunity seems obvious. Looking forward, almost nothing does. That's the hidden lesson connecting all 3 stories. The billion-dollar pizzas, the lost hard drive, the forgotten Apple fortune. These aren't really stories about money. They're stories about uncertainty. The truth is, none of these people knew what would happen next. And neither do we. Today, somewhere in the world, somebody is walking away from an opportunity that will eventually be worth millions. Somebody is dismissing an idea that will transform an industry. Somebody is throwing away something they will later wish they had kept. That's life. The future arrives disguised as ordinary moments, which means the real lesson isn't to obsess over missed opportunities. The real lesson is to stay curious, stay alert, stay open-minded. Because every generation gets its own version of Bitcoin, its own Apple, its own opportunity hiding in plain sight. The question isn't whether opportunities exist. The question is whether you'll recognize them before everyone else does. And that, perhaps, is the greatest financial lesson of all. If this video resonated with you, give it a like and subscribe so that we can continue this amazing journey together.